The Whispers of Carmine, written by Ryuo, illustration by Sidman, proofread by Ortho. Insanity, I was once told, is where one fails to separate reality from delusion. I wonder even now if that remains true for dreams. If there is a creation of our consciousness, a delusion in its own right, then the experience is exactly that, a delusion. It's rare to comprehend a dream as being such until it's over. In that way, I believe dreams are the pathways to insanity. My own insanity was becoming more frequent, and still the same dream, the same visions and the same pain across my belly where the wound had been struck. There had been no secrets to my slaying of the negative one that day, just the desperate instincts of a black runner and a tube of gunpowder. You'd find no heroes where the black zones are concerned, only the quick, the lucky, and the dead. I dream of the blood thick in my throat. The pallid dust of the ruins clogs my fur, and pain racks me as I attempt to stay conscious. No words can describe the negative one itself. I recall only toothed, distorted squeals and the stench of its undulating tendons, that of honey and feces. The negative ones are stubborn in their refusal to die. Limbs, torsos, and rusted pustules continue to flail and burst. Talons flapping madly in the throes of death found my belly and pierced. I remember their shape perfectly. 7 of them, thin like pine needles, each tip as small as a needle for sewing linen. Only one gained entry to my flesh, but it was enough. Drifting in and out of consciousness, I had taken some time before tending to my wounds and inspecting the fallen creature. I found no interest in it, only wishing to place limitless miles between myself and its corpse. But I'd found the talon that stabbed me, still wet with my blood. The very tip had snapped off. I awoke with a start. Reality blurred, and I fought mercilessly for consciousness. A thick nausea struck me, and the urge to vomit was barely contained. I was on the ground in a dimly lit hut, arms tied behind my back around a central wooden post. A horrid stench burned me. I snarled with what strength I could, turning my nose from it. The broken form of Zahan the Wise materialized. She withdrew her fingers from beneath my snout. I caught sight of the smelling salt she'd crushed between her fingers to wake me. "It's a shame you came here, Slayer." Zahan knelt before me, her old frame shuddering against the flickering torchlight. "We will take no risks." What did you do to me?" Zahan produced a small dart, holding it out to show me. "Dawn Lily is extraordinary. The shamans have failed to master it as I have. It can bring healing, visions, arousal, and, with the right treatment, a sudden sleep." My thoughts went to Loken and Tahki. They were still safe. Else I'd have been dead. Pushing back the waking sickness, I struggled to speak. "Get on with it, then." The Lynx shook her head. "You won't die tonight. You have other uses." "My acolyte isn't yours to take. I'll be flayed living and never speak of him." "The child you came with?" "No. It's you who cares about him, not us." I tested the bindings around my wrists. There was rope and steel chained there. I couldn't break them. I only sat up, waiting, glaring. Zahan explained herself quickly. 10 of our people crossed the border years ago. An angel waited and returned them to us." "Where did you hear that word?" "From them. The informed, you call them. To us, they are ensouled. Their words contain the truth." I was angered by her incomprehensible stupidity. "You should have had the compassion to kill your children. Your weakness is cruel." Zahan seemed annoyed by my narrow-sighted fury. "The black zones exist to teach us. You refuse the lessons. A black runner should know better." "I'm not playing this game. You chose. Release me or kill me." "Do others know you have come?" "Make the choice, Zahan." "The saber-toothed sister sent you." "Your choice. Now." I was still under the impression that I was dealing with a mad woman, spouting moronic riddles and nonsensical logic. Nothing she said could hurt me. I was wrong. Zahan withdrew a small blade, and I tensed. I assumed that she had made her choice and prepared myself. It would have been no lie. Death didn't frighten me anymore. But I feared for Loken. I trusted that Tahki had taken him far from here by now. Back to Dravonia. He'd be safe. I had no choice but to hope. But the old lynx didn't cut my throat, only my shoulder. I recoiled at the pain, scowling as my blood dripped onto the shining dagger. Zahan even twisted the knife, and I snarled threateningly. A poor choice, I growled. You have other uses, Slayer. The wolf who felled an angel. There is so much that I still have to learn, and you will teach me. I pulled at my restraints again. I admit that I hoped that she wouldn't kill me, if only because she roused my dark curiosity. I had much to learn about the Black Zones too. To my revulsion, Zahan brought the blade to her muzzle and licked it clean. I laughed in disgust. A cannibal cult on top of everything else. I am the last meal that you would enjoy. For a moment Zahan was still. Her eyes remained wide open. She shuddered, as though experiencing some sickening climax. Her tongue, dark with my blood, snaked across her lips. That's not our way, she muttered, eyes now drifting peacefully shut. Besides, your flesh is poison. She licked her lips again. You are blessed. I never imagined. Oh, the angel's touch. It's inside you, deep inside. I stared. Now she was starting to laugh. It was a weak, gasping chuckle that I'd expect from the final breaths of someone dying. What a curse. What a blessing. I scowled in disbelief. It had to be a trick. She couldn't know of my affliction. But when her fingers grasped on my belly, the same spot the negative one had pierced my flesh, my chest tightened in horror. The dreams are becoming more frequent, aren't they? You fear for the boy. Loken? A sweet name. Oh, you love him. You will die for him. And he? She laughed again. He will be great. Greater than you. What magic is this? One taste of my blood and she uttered the truth of my soul as though it were an open window. I stared in disbelief. What? How? Zahan didn't answer me. But of course, there was a depth to the Black Zones that I could never understand. Now, here it was, right in front of me. Zahan, you have the four? Her silence was reply enough. Whatever she was doing, it was no delusion. It was real. Maddeningly real. Your past is colorful, Slayer. To mentors, a shame about the first. You should not have killed them so mercilessly. That confirmed it. No one knew about that. No one. This was sorcery. My annoyance morphed to horror. I couldn't stand this. I lived by the privacy of my past. She'd cut me open and bared my soul. I'd never felt more vulnerable. I backed into the pool on my back, wishing only to run from this witch. Stop, I warned her, teeth bared. No, Zahan shook her head. The past is dull. You'll know nothing of my past. It doesn't matter. The future is far more interesting. To describe my past was one thing, but my future? I never heard of such a power. It couldn't be true, and yet, she knew of my past. An impossibility. Could she really read my fate in the same way? Zahan rolled her head, then laughed. The boy will die. I lunged at her, blinded by rage. The binds kept me back. A lie. He will die. By your mistakes. You're a deluded witch. Then she showed me her rage. It was far more terrifying than my own. Her serenity morphed into something monstrous. I'd seen it only once before, in the face of the negative ones. I see it all, she spat. You, Slayer, have the audacity to define the future? To refuse the Whispers of Carmine? No, the boy will die because of you. Then how? Tell me how. I'll stop it. Her fingers went to my wound again. Within me, I felt my flesh sting, right where the claw of the beast struck me. I gasped in pain. You can't stop this. It festers, Slayer. More and more every day, your mind will fade. The boy will die by your hands. It paralyzed me. I couldn't deny it to her. Called her, the mad woman she rightfully was, but I only stared, afraid, because in my heart, I believed her. But there are always other paths. Zahan smiled. She rose to her feet, leaving me shaken. We will take you to the angels soon. I'll hear your wisdom after that. You'll never stop speaking. Then she reached for my head. I turned away, snarling, resting the primal urge to snap my jaws around her fingers and bite them off. Instead, I withstood her twisted digits, grinding comfortably into my head as she petted me. Be happy. Without you, the boy will live. We both win. Was that the truth? To this day I wonder. Zahan turned and left, blood still dripping from the gash her blade had carved. The wooden door clacked behind her as I was abandoned in the cramped hut. Outside I heard her voice as she addressed her people. Alone, I could have swept. I was broken by what she had said. This woman had seen my past, my future. I no longer cared how. Even Alira had underestimated how terribly fate had struck Carmine. There seemed no end to this sickening madness. And Zahan's words rattled in my mind. The boy will die. My abdomen stung. I could almost feel the tip of the creature's claw still lodged inside my flesh. I'd die in this place, but perhaps that was for the best. Loken would indeed be safe without me. I'd be so foolish, so weak, letting him near while this poison devoured me from within. Zahan had told me nothing that I hadn't already believed. I was no better than her. I'm sorry, Loken, I whispered to myself. Be safe from here on out. How long had passed? An hour? 2? A day? The effects of Zahan's downly toxin came and went. I was delirious. When I heard the slicing flesh outside, I assumed that it was a dream, the dull thud of a body hitting the floor. Less so. My head shot up, eyes wide in alarm, and when the door opened, I glared in disbelief and fury. Tahki! I hissed at the honey badger as she stormed inside, shutting the door behind her. Shh! The young warden scrambled instantly to the pole binding me, fumbling with the restraints. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Rescuing your white-furred ass? The restraints became looser. I fucking told you this shit was cracked. Where's Loken? He's hiding. Look, I wasn't gonna come, but he made me. Little shit's got a real cute eyes when he's sad. Broke my fucking heart. What can I say? I groaned in frustration. That stupid boy. That stupid, kind boy. You shouldn't have. Oh, shut up. Tahki grunted. The rope around my wrists became loose, and I pulled my arms to my front. They ached, but I was free. I struggled to my feet, wobbling. Tahki dropped her spear and grabbed me before I fell. I clung to her, wincing in pain. The wound in my belly was burning. Aya, what's going on in this place? I growled, trying to stand on my own 2 feet. Tahki gently pushed me, but I wavered again and fell against a post. Zahan. She's lost her mind. Alira was right. They're turning people, making them informed. I don't know how. Tahki didn't seem to understand. She was too young for all of this. She was a warrior, not a black runner. What the fuck do we do? We need to leave. Get back to Dravonia. I need Caius. I need his army. Tahki was shocked. That bad? Yes, that bad. Whatever Tahki's rescue plan had been, it hadn't been tight enough. Outside the hut, a rasping voice bellowed. Zahan's shout bled through the walls. Join us! Outside! Neither of us moved. I glared at Tahki. You were seen? The badger just growled, furious and confused. I was fucking quick. I don't know how. Quickly now, Zahan shouted again. The boy is here. No. Ignoring all sense of self, I pushed past Tahki and stumbled out of the door, heart beating in horror. Outside the hut had been surrounded. Darkness had fallen in its entirety. Zahan's cultists, those who were once the Oxtail clan, waited patiently. Each clutched a makeshift weapon, a farming scythe, a pitchfork, a mallet. But these were not warriors. They were victims of Zahan's so-called wisdom, and the lynx herself was amongst them. Besides her, 2 fully grown bipeds struggled to contain the writhing, spitting, and biting of a child. Loken! All caution was thrown to the wind. I tried to rush for him, failing to spot the blade in Zahan's hand, the same that she'd drawn my blood with. Tahki was the savior who pulled me back, the badger reading the situation far better than I had. I was blinded by fury. Loken looked at me. His eyes were flooded with fear. He tried to reach me, whining and yelping desperately, but his captors held him back. She dared? She dared to hurt him? Release him immediately or I'll kill you all, I spat, shaking with a rage that brought me closer to my feral kin than I had ever imagined. Loken never once stopped fighting his captors, both clearly strained to their limits in their efforts to keep the small husky contained. One had blood pouring from their hand, the flesh bitten deeply by tiny, relentless jaws. Tahki joined my side, spear raised. Will someone tell me what the fuck is going on? Zahan scoffed at Tahki. You're below this, badger. This is about them. As she spoke, her eyes turned to the distant cottage that had been locked up with chains. Inside, I could hear the wailing of the informed. It was a piercing, violent shriek of broken, insane voices. The chorus was enough to break the will of anyone. I could only imagine what subjecting oneself to it every day had done to the minds of these people. Tahki heard it too. Her face paled. Aya, she whispered. What the hell is in there? I didn't answer. Zahan turned back to me. Your acolyte came by himself, for you. I groaned, both humbled and heartbroken. Stupid, kind boy. Zahan was right. One way or another, I would be his death. I won't ask again. Let him go. Your spear, badger. Zahan pointed to Tahki. The warden glanced at me, desperate. I just nodded. Tahki threw her spear down to the ground, enraged. Good. This was all fated. It is the correct path. Eat shit, you old bit. Tahki spoke before thinking. Zahan moved the blade to Loken's throat. I surged forward again, but stopped when the boy howled as a blade kissed his throat. Zahan, I hissed. Please, stop this. I could never harm a child. The lynx shook her head in sympathy. Even here now, with the blade on his flesh, he is safer with me than you. That stung, deeply. I was battling my will to surge forwards and tear Zahan's throat out with my fangs. She tested my will once more when her blade slashed against Loken's paw. Blood dripping down, and the boy howled. Nothing hurt me more than hearing his wails. Tahki grabbed me before I could run to him. It gave me immense pride to see Loken snap his jaw at Zahan as she dripped his blood onto her blade. He had far more courage than I could have ever imagined. I just wanted to see him free. See him run. See him safe. I would die for that. I would kill for that. Zahan lifted Loken's blood dripping from her dagger to her lips. Don't you dare, I hissed, fighting against Tahki's hold. The honey badger was staring, face contorted in confusion. Zahan licked Loken's blood from the blade. No! Say nothing to him! I howled. Even the boy was startled by my alarm, eyes locking onto me in fear. Loken, cover your ears. Don't listen to a word. But Zahan's audacity had no limit. Once again, I saw her head crane as though struck by some incomprehensible rapture. All around us, the oxtail tribe leaned in, anticipating her next words with glee. Tahki eyed her spear, waiting for a split-second opportunity to strike. There was a pause, tense, horrible, and inconceivably long. Loken stared up at Zahan, childish eyes full of fear and confusion. The old lynx smiled. A good hound, a strong hound, and so much fear. She shuddered. Your future is vague, boy. So many paths. I see blood, but also... She blinked. Something more? Then everything changed. Zahan changed. Her delighted ramblings were stifled by a sudden hesitation. I froze, ears pining for the next words. This was different. Zahan frowned. She was confused, startled. Was that fear in her voice? Even the cultists around her sensed it. Once craning forward with satisfied glee, now they exchanged awkward, nervous glances. Zahan opened her eyes, licking Loken's blood clean from her lips. This boy, she whispered. You'll find... Oh. Then she screamed. Her cultists jumped back in horror. Loken tried to run, horrified. Tahki and I stared, utterly startled. It was the terrified, agonized scream of someone dying an excruciating death. Everyone was distracted, so I took a step forward. Zahan screamed again. She scrambled backwards, flailing and patting down her body as though she were on fire. No! Help me! Get it away! Get him away! Ugh! Tahki and I exchanged a look. I took another small, silent step closer to Loken. Zahan just continued her wailing. You can't! Away! It was never meant to be! Spare us! I readied myself. Please! It wasn't us! Tahki lowered down and collected her spear. Monster! Stop the music! Stop it! Urgh! Then suddenly, she stopped screaming. Her cries of pain turned to laughter. Her cultists were frozen in horror, completely unnerved. The lynx just smiled in bliss. Beautiful. Then, devoid of all hesitation, she slashed the throat of the cultist nearest to her, the one holding Loken. Chaos erupted. The cultists, shocked and confused by their leader's actions, recoiled and began howling in betrayal. What was happening? Zahan grasped Loken by the throat. I lost all caution and charged. But Zahan didn't hurt Loken. She threw him at me. The boy collapsed on the ground and I threw myself down to grab him. My arms wrapped around the boy and I crushed him into my grasp, spinning us both around to put myself between Zahan and him. Confused, bloodied madness followed. The cult cried and yelled in confusion. Zahan killed one of her own, a spontaneous, unexplained act of violence that left them stunned and bewildered. They raised their weapons, unsure who to trust, unsure what to do. I didn't care. I bent down and cupped Loken's face. I have you. I soothed him and moved to tears with relief. I have you, Loken. He was as shocked and confused as everyone else. He just stared back, broken. Zahan had disappeared into the darkness. In her wake, the madness of her cultists was shattered into something horrifying. All order to their insanity was gone in an instant. Betrayed, confused, and abandoned, they turned on us, on each other, on everything. Tahki spun her spear around, roaring in fury. All attention went to her. Back the fuck off, she screamed to the Oxtail clan. They were advancing on her. Hey, back off, we're leaving. Don't come closer. But they ignored her, snarling, hissing, and shouting. They drew closer like ravenous beasts. I don't want to hurt anyone. Get away! I stood up, furiously grasping Loken to my side. I searched for Zahan once again, but she was gone. Without her, the threads holding these cultist minds together had snapped. Nothing held them back. One of them got too close. I sensed the hesitation in Tahki's strike. She didn't want this. These weren't soldiers there to test their honor. They were just people, brainwashed and confused. Victims. But Tahki struck regardless. Her spear burst through the biped's throat. Blood sprayed onto the honey badger's face as their throats was ruptured before our very eyes. I whirled Loken around, desperate to spare him the sight of the cultists flailing in agony as they drowned in their own blood. But we were met with the form of 3 more oxtail bipeds advancing on us. There was no talking them down. It would be an insane slaughter, one way or another. Why? Why had Zahan abandoned them so suddenly? To save herself? What in the name of the gods has she seen? Tahki was frozen, horrified. The fatally wounded biped pulled herself free from her spear and writhed on the ground, dying slowly and painfully as their blood stained the snow red. The badger stared down at the body. Her will shattered. I'd seen the face in the soldiers before. She didn't want this, but right now, she had no choice. Tahki! I roared at her, trying to break her trance. It worked. The badger jolted to her senses just as 2 more lunged forwards, brandishing blunt weapons with clumsy, mindless zeal. I witnessed the badger's talent in those 3 seconds it took to take them down. 2 quick, clean slashes, and they were dead. More blood covered the badger. I had no weapon. I couldn't help. There was no saving these cultists. If we were to survive, they all had to be dead by dawn. Tahki began the revolting deed with stunning expertise. Each insane cultist that came to her was struck down. They stood no chance. I focused on Loken. I had to keep him safe. That was all that mattered. I grabbed the boy desperately and lifted him up to carry him free. But a male cultist with a scythe was on me too quickly. I turned my back to the madman to shield Loken, and his wide slash carved through my back and shoulders. I howled, pain blinding me. Tahki heard me. She turned, her eyes wide. I heard her yell my name, but I could only focus on standing as I clutched Loken. The next moment, the badger spear flew past my head and slammed into the cultist's eyes with a sickening thud. Tahki rushed over to help, but more cultists were surrounding us. Some just fled into the darkness. Others were descending into a feral fury beyond that of any inform that I'd ever seen. As the screaming, shouting, and spraying of blood became deafening, the inform chained up in the hut began singing. I was no stranger to violence. I had been taught to fight, and well. However, Tahki was a warrior here. I would never have survived such odds without her. She became the centerpiece of the massacre. Each and every cultist bravely and stupidly threw themselves to Tahki's fury, and she dispatched each one with bloody, heartbroken proficiency. They never once favored their own life. Indeed, many seemed devoid of the ability to feel pain, still clawing and biting at Tahki as she cleaved their parts from them with bloody, disgusting proficiency. Bone shined in the night, cleaved from the flesh by Tahki's spear. Wet, hot blood quickly cooled in the bitter wind chill. I stumbled and swayed amidst the carnage. Blood poured down my fur from the slash on my back, and the wound deep in my gut was burning with a blind hot intensity. I focused only on Loken, holding him tightly and shielding his eyes from the depravity that unfolded. The massacre devolved into a bloodletting as they turned on each other. Each sight was worse than the last. A cultist had thrust his arm elbow deep down the throat of another, blood fountaining out the victim's mouth as her jaw cracked off its hinges. Another cultist was driving their thumb into the eye sockets of another. I saw them burst like grapes, and the victim writhed and wailed in helpless agony. In the turmoil, many cultists seemed to completely ignore us. They were too busy throwing themselves at Tahki, clawing their own flesh from their bones, or tearing tendrils of muscle and sinew out of one another. Fingernails were split and peeled away. Teeth were shattered on stone. The noise was overpowering, crunching, screaming, singing, and squelching. Soon the air was thick with the rusted scent of blood and gore. And beneath it all, the screeching singing of the informed locked in the building. Every second, the slaughter was drowned by their pitch, and the old wound in my abdomen began to sting, with far greater intensity than any pain that I'd ever felt. One cultist decided that I was the easiest target, with Loken clutched to my chest and charged with the pitchfork. I was forced to throw Loken back to safety and defend myself. "Run!" I screamed at the boy. I couldn't even turn to check if he'd followed my instructions. The cultist was on me. I ducked a wild, desperate stab from the pitchfork and rose to meet their throat. She tried to jump back, but I grabbed her by the muzzle and, fighting the pain on my back and my abdomen, twisted. With a crack, the biped fell down, dead. Before I could turn back to Loken, two more took me for an easy target and joined the fray. I sidestepped a wild swing from a mallet, grabbing the shaft of the weapon and tugging it from the cultist's hands with a howl. The other found an opening, a blunt weapon striking my ribs. I felt something crack and howled, kicking the man down and turning the mallet on his face. His features exploded in a disgusting spray of shining blood, flesh, and teeth. "Loken!" I screamed, clutching my side. I was hurt badly, but only his safety mattered. "Loken!" He was gone. No. Where was he? I screamed his name again, but it was lost over the insanity. I couldn't see Tahki. I couldn't see Zahan, only bloody bodies and howling cultists. Beneath our feet, the crimson petals of Carmine laughed and flexed their red tendrils while blood soaked them. I dodged, weaved, and staggered around the scene. The informed in their hut were howling into the night like wild wolves now, and I tried blocking my ears to no effect. My fur was coated red, and I no longer knew how much belonged to me. "Loken!" I howled again. I searched the bodies, each more mutilated and disfigured than the last, but there was no sign of the husky. The old wound in my stomach now stung just as it did the day that I received it, as though the negative one was still there, twisting and turning its talons inside me. I squeezed my side while tripping and stumbling, slipping on a pool of blood left by the corpse of a cultist split open, like a red fruit. I finally saw Loken. He was running, just like I had said, but in the worst possible direction. I forgot every ounce of pain and broke into a sprint, screaming his name. He couldn't hear me. He just kept fleeing the scene, out of the village, away from the slaughter, and straight into the black zone. Loken! Loken, come to me! Loken! My cries shattered the odd silence. Thick, strangling branches blocked my path as I cut a desperate path through the forest. I was in the black zone now. The zone of the bloody massacre back at the village was dulled, as though heard from ears submerged in thick, vile salt water. Now I was at the mercy of the cutting wind and paralyzing silence, searching desperately for Loken under the oppressive, crushing atmosphere. There was a darkness far beyond what night could normally conjure. The black zones were rapturous tonight, stirred by the delicious slaughter that they permitted on their very doorstep. The bitter, smothering quiet was far, far deadlier than the village. Neither Loken nor I could survive here long. My fur was sticky and warm with blood. It was so damn cold and my feet dragged through the thick layer of snow. My wounds were burning and I could only limp, one arm clutched to my belly, and I squint through the black. My voice was hoarse from screaming Loken's name, but he'd vanished. I couldn't stand it. My whole being writhed in dread and urgency. What state would I eventually find him in? Every corner I turned, every black tree I stumbled against, I prayed that I'd find him huddled, hiding, safe. Just like the day that I found him, and I will be the death of him. He'd been so small that day, so damaged. How could someone hate something so hurt? I'd wiped his tears, sat with him for hours, in silence. He had no reason to trust this stranger, but he had. No one had ever trusted me before. To this day, that trust was humbled and changed me. A surge of agony struck my belly, and I doubled over in pain. I will be the death of him. Loken, where are you? He'd been so gifted in the fort. His courage in the face of utter oblivion remained my greatest lesson. I did everything that I could for him, but I will be the death of him. I snarled, trying to push myself to my feet. Zahan's words rang true in my head. He was safer with me, even here, even now, in the black zone. If I found him, he'd be fated to die. Perhaps he'd be safer if... I'm sorry, Loken. I couldn't do it. I couldn't abandon him, no matter my fears. I didn't have the strength. Getting Loken out of this place right now was all that mattered. I forced myself back up. I ignored my doubts. I refused to let my madness take me. I wouldn't fall into the same insanity as Zahan. Loken needed me. I had to believe that. Through the darkness, a black structure loomed in the view. It was the barn. The same Zahan had showed me from the border, well before this madness had begun. Against the jagged outlines of the clawed trees, it struck out as in an unnaturally perfect shape, a straight angles and smooth contours. This should never have been built here. The door was ajar. I limped closer. There was a dull, muddy crimson blinking from the open door. Loken? My breath frosted in front of me. All pain ebbed as my body became numb. The light grew bright. It was a thick, viscid red. It was all silent. The rustling trees, the whimpering wind, the wet padding of my feet. They were holding their breath in awe, in worship. I limped forward. The barn door got closer. The cold shredded me. I limped forward. The barn got closer. Moving was difficult. It felt like swimming. I limped forward. The barn got closer. The pressure of the ocean was crushing me from above. I limped forward. The barn got closer. A buzz rang in my ears. It was the air, reality, shuddering in gleeful anticipation. I limped forward. The barn got closer. The red glow was inside me now. I reached the door and went in. Loken's silhouette had its back to me. The small husky was a perfectly still statue, staring inside. He was fixated. It towered above him, blurred and twisted, its many limbs coiled and tangled in rapturous torture. Corroded steel dripping with blood, filth and pus squalled and purred. It twisted and labored under its own obnoxious weight. A shattering, insectoid voice babbled in inane mechanical nonsense. The mind perforated. The barth writhed, emaciated wood and saturated iron coiled and bloated. The negative one rose to its full height and admired the child standing before it. With ravenous, delighted curiosity, I ran up behind Loken and grabbed him, covering his eyes. I carried him out of the barn. Shh. It's okay. You're here. With me. I was sitting with my back against the tree, inches from the black zone border, but safely outside of it. In my lap, I clutched Loken to my chest. He was trembling. I stroked his head, whispered sweet, soothing nonsense into his ear. And he was safe. Snow had begun falling again, a gentle tickle of the white against the black ground. Dawn would soon break. We were waiting. The village had gone silent. I dreaded whatever we'd find there. I'd abandoned Tahki to save Loken. I could only pray that she'd be alive. It was time to move. I pulled Loken's face up to mine, staring into his blue hues with my own. Hey, I said. Are you with me, little one? The husky blinked at me twice, then nodded. I smiled. Of course he was all right. He was stronger than I ever gave him credit for. He got up first, and then stepped back as I tried to get to my feet. The old wound in my gut no longer hurt, but the slash across my back was agony. I snarled, unable to stand. Loken clasped my hands with his small paws and tried to pull me up. Thank you, Loken, I smiled, stroking his head. He kept his grip on my arm tight as we limped back towards the village. I couldn't bring myself to shield Loken's eyes from the sight. It would be cruel to deny him this lesson. Blood, bone, and gore shone amidst the dawn light. Snow dusted the horror, leaving the scene a delicate and horrible shade of white and red. I lost count of the bodies. Some were intact, others had been pulled apart. Loken almost tripped on a corpse. I caught him. Be careful, I whispered. It was absolutely silent. My own voice offended the atmosphere. Soon we found Tahki. She was alive. The badger was sitting on a fallen tree trunk, her pelt shining with blood that wasn't her own. On the ground lay her spear, shattered in two. She wore no expression, simply staring forwards with tired, unblinking eyes, her rasp breaths fogged in the chill. I approached slowly, moving Loken behind me. I saw Tahki's ears flick to acknowledge my presence, but she said nothing. She replied immediately and raised her eyebrows. Yeah? Yep. Yeah? I took in the sight of the bodies around us. Most were clean kills. Cautiously, slowly, I sat down beside Tahki. Loken kept his distance. I am so sorry, Tahki. I left you to all this. The badger nodded. It's okay. There was a pause. It's over now. She shivered. There. There were, there were children in there. Where? Tahki's head nodded to the nearest structure. It was a hut Zahan had chained her informed villagers inside. It had been opened, the ropes binding it shut cut. You killed them. Her head slowly falls down. She scrapes her hand across her forehead, flicking blood clean from her fingers. I, I, I had to. I saw him in there. They were, they didn't even look alive. Chewed most of their own faces off. Looked like they had been in there for years. I couldn't leave them like that. She didn't know what to say. Tahki was so young, boisterous. She hadn't signed up for this. It would haunt her for the rest of her life. What about Zahan? Tahki just shakes her head. I, I just ain't cut out for this stuff, you know? I... Finally, she started to weep. She clenched her jaw to keep her face straight, but the tears rolled down regardless. This was... Tahki. I clasped her shoulders, squeezing. I didn't know her well, so I could only speak my own truths to offer what reassurance I could. This was the Black Zones. They did this. To Zahan, to the Oxtail clan. You did the right thing. She nodded slowly. I always thought we're just legends, you know? I didn't believe it. Nothing is more real than the ocean. But we're ashore now. It's over. Tahki didn't reply at first. She took a look around at the bloody scene. The sun was rising and it illuminated the whole massacre. I think I want to leave. I nodded. On your feet, warrior. With difficulty, I dragged her up. She kept her eyes locked on me, refusing to look around. I, um, you, look, I don't want this to follow me. I can't handle it. Then we'll tell no one, only Dravonia. The Oxtail clan became bandits. They attacked us. You fought back. The rest fled into the Black Zone, never to be seen again. That is all. She puffed out her cheeks, relieved. Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. She wiped her eyes. Think I'm gonna need a bath. I smiled. I know a few spots on the way back. We'll get cleaned up. Right. Yeah. Works for me. Yep. Tahki took a breath, smiling back. Tahki, I owe you my life. And Loken's. Yeah, well, just doing me job, you know? Someone's gotta. Before she could finish, I hugged her. I'd been wrong. There were heroes of the Black Zones. I'd witnessed the birth of one that day. Tahki's arms were limp for a while. Then slowly she hugged me back. I felt her heave a heavy breath, another wave of tears flooding her eyes. You're going to be okay, Tahki. Mm. We stayed there for a while. Then she chuckled. Gonna have to let go sooner or later, bitch. I'm getting turned on. I released her, chuckling. Would that be so terrible? Tahki just rolled her eyes. It's a long walk home. Come on. I want to get shot of this place. I nodded, allowing Tahki to collect what remained of her spears and catch her breath. So I turned back to check on Loken. When he saw me approach, he stepped over and waited for my instructions. He wasn't trembling anymore. I lowered myself to one knee, smiling at him. We're going home now, okay? He nodded. Are you hurt anywhere? He shook his head. Loken, you shouldn't have come for me. You put yourself in danger. He scowled. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. I hesitated. One day, Loken, I won't be here. That could have been today. It could be tomorrow. He stared at me, tail still. He didn't like what he was hearing. I will always protect you, I promise. But Loken, you must protect yourself. I paused. Even from me. He whined, baffled. Perhaps. My abdomen flashed with pain. I ignored it. You are stronger than I ever imagined. You'll be even stronger without me. He shook his head, so I stroked his ears. I'm not going anywhere yet. I'll protect you. But sometimes, that might mean letting me go. You'll be a black runner soon. Now wasn't the time to tell him this. It wasn't for his benefit, only my own. So I just smiled. Just be ready, okay? One day. Then he spoke. Demon. My head lurched. I stared, baffled. I'd never heard his voice before. What, what did you say? Demon. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand it. How? I put my hands on his shoulders, staring. You... Loken, what are you saying? Demon. I never heard the word before. Was he trying to say something else? I don't understand. Can you say anything else? That's not a word. He shook his head. Demon. I squinted. Where did you learn that word? He pointed past me. I turned around, following his finger. He was pointing into the black zone, back towards the barn. Demon. So it wasn't his word. I knew better than to react with fear. Loken was wise, far wiser than Zahan, far wiser than me. I decided to trust him. That's a good name, Loken. A very good name for them. Dwelling on this moment was a bad idea. I had to move on it quickly. There'd be time to examine this revelation later. Perhaps you'd like to practice more words? I'll teach you. He slowly nodded and then said something else. Okay. Okay? Okay. I laughed, then hugged him. Good hound. He was safe with me. For now. Years later, that changed, just as Zahan had predicted, just as I predicted. I had enough time left to watch Loken become a man, and a far wiser Black Runner than I could ever have hoped of being. He wasn't safe with me around anymore. No one was. It pains me to remember those final weeks, many years after Carmine. I taught him everything that I could, but time was never my ally. The wound within me festered. Its poison would spread. Zahan had told me that I'd be the death of Loken, but she'd also said that there were other paths. So as my condition grew more intense, I chose the other path. It wasn't difficult at first. It was easy to feign the cough, then the chills and the weakness. I ate as little as possible to appear thin. Logan was devastated, so I aimed to make it quick. I wouldn't make him suffer more than I had to. More difficult was finding the secrets of Donnelly Zahan had spoken of. I was lucky in the end to find a talented sugar cook who aided me. The right ingredients mixed correctly created a deep sleep, indistinguishable from death. It was a shallow grave that I was buried in. Tahki never questioned the odd condition of my funeral. I was grateful to be asleep for that. When I awoke, I dug myself free and covered the grave up yet again. The rot had truly taken root within me. Now the pain was in my chest too. My fur had turned gray. The light hurt. I moved only at night. I lost track of time. I lost track of sense. I wandered between dreams and reality. The air felt thin after time was changing. The piece of the negative one inside me had spread. It was unstoppable now. It was some time before that I felt a pull, a yearning, desperate tug towards the black zones. I resisted it at first, but what was the point? Staying ashore was painful now. Soon I was blinded, but not in the black zone. There I could breathe, I could see, I could hunt. One day I went past the border to clear my mind and found that I couldn't return. I didn't want to either. The change didn't frighten me anymore. I was free, so I traveled, alone, changed and determined. I retained what was left of my mind. I'm still traveling today, far beyond Elila, through the endless black zones that surround it. It turns out that they're not endless. Not at all.